Right, welcome back everybody. It's been quite a bit of variety today. I think we've been making you run all over the place. I hope it's been a valuable set of sessions. We're now on the final stretch, but I'd invite you to give your full concentration for the final bit to our final set of speakers. I'd like to welcome Becky, who is the Deputy Director, Portfolio Delivery at UKHSA, along with their partner that helped them, Martin from CloudCubed. So welcome, and we'd love to hear your story.
Hello everyone, right, I'm going to go on to the next. So this is us, this is me pre-COVID when I'm less tired and with longer hair. And so from UKHSA, which was Public Health England before. So earlier we said about the 99% of the people here in technology. Well, I'm probably in the 1% then, because I'm not actually in tech. I'm the person that normally has to face off against the board or find a commercially compliant route to bring in all of the cool technical stuff that we want to bring in. So that's kind of my role. And then during the UKHSA transformation, the introduction of LeanIX, I was head of delivery. So working out how to make a lot of this happen.
Yeah, I think most of you met me in the previous session. So I'm Martin Sharkey. I'm the Chief Information Technology Officer for CloudCubed. We're a pretty recent organisation, but that's not a reflection of my time in the industry. I've been in the industry since about 1997, and I've spent a long time doing large-scale, complex digital transformations, mainly migrations in the last 10 years. So that's a little bit about me.
So I thought I'd start with, before we went into what UKHSA is, I thought I kind of wanted to talk about Public Health England, because it's obviously something I'm passionate about, but I wondered sort of how many people even knew that Public Health England was around before COVID. It was quite a small organisation, but it actually was something before COVID came along, and it did quite a lot of stuff. So why was it there? Our tagline used to be protecting and improving the nation's health. And we had sort of one arm that did surveillance, and it did all the things like, it did loads of work around the Ebola response. We've got people abroad. We also did the Salisbury poisoning. Well, didn't do the Salisbury poisoning. That came out wrong. We definitely didn't do it. We dealt with the consequences of it, and then we also did things like health improvement. So the Couch to 5K app, even though it's branded as NHS, that was Public Health England. All the things around 5 a day, and lots of things around, specifically around in schools with what sort of amount of sugar intake they should have and various things like that. So I really loved all of that stuff. I think it's great. And COVID, and I suppose the surveillance element, was kind of just like 10% of what we did. So just to give a little context, that's who Public Health England was. So it was also an organisation that was formed in 2013. So it was still fairly young, really, and that was 100 plus NHS and various other organisations that all came together. So whilst we were still PHE, we still had a lot of issues. We'd only just got to the point of having sort of a single sort of email system, basically, where we could all be on the same infrastructure and the same network. So we were quite a long way from even being a single organisation before we even had to become something else. We all had the resourcing and funding challenges, which I'm sure you all have, because we all suffer with it. But we also had the extra fun of our services that were already important suddenly became critical. So, for example, contact tracing, that's something that PHE always had done. And hopefully it was a good thing if people didn't know about it, because it meant that it didn't turn into a nationwide pandemic. So lots of things were stopped, and we tracked people and made sure that they didn't spread any further. But that was managed by like a spreadsheet, and we had, I think, a couple of servers that were locally somewhere that stored all of our sort of PCR information and various other things. So when COVID hit, we were given, I think, 4.5 weeks to turn our little service that was on a server somewhere in a garage, run on a spreadsheet, into a national service. So we had to move everything to the cloud. We had to work out how to write all of the application which ended up written in a really weird language, which I don't even know what it was, but it was something that was apparently very difficult to do. So we had it all written like that, and then you had to launch it in 5 weeks. So that was kind of an example of the challenges that we were dealing with, and also probably why, to a lot of people, it may have seemed like the contact tracing thing wasn't that great. But want to bear in mind that we did it all in 5 weeks, and we had a team of probably about 6 or 7 people working on it to try and do it for the whole country. So it was a fun time. So yeah, that happened, and we were then trying to scale up to deal with COVID. And then during that, we found out, which everyone loves to find out, on a Sunday morning in the Daily Telegraph, that that PHE is being disbanded, and that actually we're going to be the UK Health Security Agency. So whilst we're all dealing with the pandemic, there was us, and then also they set up Test and Trace and the Joint Biosecurity Centre. So we had them looking at the data, and then we had Test and Trace that we're dealing with mainly around the testing, not so much the tracing at that point. So they were all in existence, and they said, you're going to be UK Health Security Agency. And then they said, we're also going to take the health improvement arm, and we're going to send them to OHID, which is Chris Whitty's new department that they created, NHS Digital, NHS E&I, and then DHSC. So you can kind of see that we've got PHE that had lots and lots and lots of different systems and applications, all doing such a varied thing across surveillance and health improvement. And then we had all the new systems that were spun up for for testing and all of the things like that. And then we had all of the systems that were set up to analyse all of the data. And then we had to split all of those off and then go into 4 different organisations. So these were the business goals of UKHSA. Basically, keep protecting us from any further pandemic. How do we scale up? How do we take what we've got? How do we, learn, but also build on the immense amount of money that everyone knows was spent on COVID, and actually put it to some good use? And how do we keep transforming and keep becoming sort of an innovative agency? So our challenge: to gain a better visibility and control of our existing technology landscape in preparation for the business transformation and enabling future innovation. So what that meant to me was, okay, we've got everything everywhere, we don't know what we have, how do we make that one organisation, and then how do we also enable those other 4 receiving organisations to get this, all whilst we're still dealing with the pandemic. So I'm quite aware of my skill set, and it's not doing that. And I also knew that the team were not only massively just exhausted from working on COVID all the time, but we didn't have the right skills or the right capability, but we knew what needed to be done. So we decided to bring in the professionals. Enter Cloud Cubed. There you go. Do you want the clicky thing?
Yeah. So I guess what we were presented with was a stakeholder who wasn't a technologist, self-confessed, wasn't a technologist, who was looking after quite a vast portfolio within Public Health England, who had these very significant business challenges that she had to address. And what we had to do is try and help her make sense of the business. And it wasn't a technology-led engagement, it was more business-led engagement. So we talked earlier on about how enterprise architecture introduced the LeanIX tool. But this is really about how do we understand the business, how do we understand the nature of the business, how do we understand the functions that business provides, and the customers that the business serves, and who owns the applications and data within the business. So all of that stuff was missing. Again, in one of the sessions before this, we talked about legacy architecture processes. Well, there weren't really any processes anyway, so it wasn't even that there was legacy architecture processes, they just didn't exist. The function wasn't there. These were things that the business had to build, and what we needed to do is help Becky and her team understand how that business was formed in support then of the future transition. So what we did is we introduced the LeanIX tool, and we started looking at how we could engage the wider business. So it was a big business change program that needed to happen. So we needed to look at how we would use the tool, how we would map the assets within the tool itself, how we would engage with the various business users, which is really difficult because we actually didn't really have an idea of who they were. All this information was inside people's heads, not captured in any documents. You know, that was a big challenge in and of itself. So setting up communications, establishing the relationships, assigning users, assigning ownership and accountability, defining the business, defining the functions, and defining the applications that underpin the business. So what we created then was the PHE universe. You know, you look at that and you think, well, actually there's not as many applications as I'd expect to see in an organization that's been brought together like PHE. But if you look there, you get a data lake in there. That data lake itself explodes into quite a significant service. So you get single application instances, plus you've got then major services with multiple different applications that sit inside them, all underpinned by a plethora of technology that's of varying age of maturity or heritage. Let's just use the word heritage. Let's not use the word legacy. Let's use the word heritage. So that was really the PHE universe. And our next step then was, well, how do we make sense of all this noise? Because it's quite a busy diagram, and you can see that the integrations, the interactions between each one of those services quite significant. I always describe this as like a spider's web when I think of large-scale migration. You pull one of those applications, and the tendrils of the web pull along with it, and God knows what you can break whenever you're doing that. So you have to really understand, especially when you're looking at mergers and demergers of businesses, which is exactly what was happening here. So making sense of the noise. We had to take the information that we discovered about the business. We had to take the information that we found within the questionnaires and the fact sheets about the applications, and look at how we could create the existing business model. So one of the ambitions that PHE were looking to address was a movement towards product orientation. So moving away from very project-oriented delivery models to products. So what this did is it at least allowed us to get to a point where we could describe the existing business to enable that digital transformation and innovation through change. So we took all that information, we worked with Becky and the wider business and all the key stakeholders to assign ownership of the portfolios, assign ownership of the products, and identify gaps where the gaps existed, because there were gaps. Remember that this was an organization of, I think it was 100 organizations, Becky, from NHS, that came together, crashed together with all their own separate processes, their own separate systems, their own separate people and skills, and their own separate cultures, crashed together under one organization. And not much traction had been made to try and address that over the years, because the guys were just firefighting, trying to respond to the next latest, greatest thing. So that's making sense of the noise. LeanIX enabled us to actually create a visual aid for the business so that they could actually look at where they sat within the business, what the function this business provided was, and how critical that service was as well. So this is the first step that we made. We then went on to look at what systems underpin these services. So PHE went from an organization that was really, really important to being absolutely critical, fundamental during the pandemic. Now that means that we need to understand what it is that we're building our systems on, what services we have are public consuming, and how we store our information and data in those systems that surface that capability. We have to understand the risk that we're willing to accept in the platform. So we needed to understand what critical systems were sitting on what pieces of infrastructure, what pieces of software were running underneath them as well, so we could understand how we could prop those up or transform them, or even move them to the cloud. And quite a number of the test and trace services were then moved into one of our major cloud service providers. So this is really a depiction of the technical debt that we were able to pull out from all the information that we gathered. We used a discovery tool. Initially, we started with manual discovery using the questionnaires and fact sheets. And then what we did is we looked then at an integration tool which took really accurate information from the infrastructure and software landscape, and we integrated that into the LeanIX platform so we could take advantage of the lifecycle management functions that it had, because it's really accurate, it's really robust, and we could see what the end of support life was in some of the systems where vulnerabilities might have existed. So for the very first time, we had almost demystified the PHE universe, untangled the spider's web, and then gifted PHE with the ability then to look at how they could build their transformation efforts for the future, and I guess accelerate the mergers and demergers.
Yeah, that's exactly what we did. And I remember taking this diagram, which I used to support what team we needed and what structure we needed. And I could go along and go, I need this amount of money if you want this business to be sustainable, if you want transformation, and set up the product teams, which gave us basically data that I didn't have before. It was I knew we needed all of that stuff, but when you get the questions from the board, well, tell me what stats they are and tell me why you need it and tell me what difference it's going to make. At least I go, wow, look at this lovely diagram which tells you these are all our critical systems, and actually this is how many people engage with them, and this is what you get out of it, and this is how used they are, and this is what you will get if we invest this amount of money. So for me, that's what it gave me. I know that the architects loved it on stuff that I don't understand, but they absolutely loved it, and drilled down all the thing. But I loved it because it meant, as I say, it gave me that information to base all of the structure and what our op model would look like. So it meant I could do something with it. So it was amazing from that perspective. I think there's one more slide.
Yeah, one more slide.
So this is a bit of a summary of basically what it did. So as I was saying earlier, it gave us an understanding of actually what we had, which I can't explain how much difference that made when we knew we had a problem, but we didn't know how big the problem was. So when you're then asked, well, how much is it going to cost to fix that, and how long is it going to take, where do you start? So it meant we had all of that information and data to be able to say this is how long it's going to be, and also manage expectations, because I think a lot of people thought, as we did with set up a contact tracing service in 4 weeks, how hard can that be, of actually going, well, this is why we can't do that, or this is why we need to move this to the cloud, and this is why this isn't sustainable for the future. So yeah, it just it changed so much, and we're still only starting with it because we basically know what we've got, and we still don't really know where we're going with it either, but we're working that out. And I think the other thing that really came through for me was we did all of this, and whilst we were still managing the pandemic, and whilst we were still in the throes of remote working and having to do all of this, and poor Cloud Cube would it must have been much easier if we could have had conversations with people, but it wasn't. It was all like, here's a list. I remember just saying, here's a random list of people, go and phone them up and find out whether they own that service or what's happening with it. So to do all of that remotely, whilst we were all dealing, and they probably didn't really want to engage that much, given that they were responsible for all of the systems at the labs and everything. So yeah, it changed everything, and it meant that we could be organised, which is basically what I really wanted out of all of it anyway.
Absolutely.
So yeah, that's it.
Thank you to you both. I'm sure there may be a few questions, so we do have a couple of minutes, if it's okay for you, perhaps to pick a couple of questions. So any questions? Let me hand this mic to you.
What was the integration application used to actually find the end of life?
Sorry, could you repeat that?
You used a tool to identify the applications and their support cycle or end of life.
Well, I mean, it's a different product. We used a tool called Device42, and we actually extracted the data using a custom script, but we matched it up with the LeanIX data model, used a LeanIX identifier to be able to tag that data, and we imported that in. The key thing really was that LeanIX had the lifecycle management functionality that could identify the end of support life, and we were getting really, really accurate data insights at that point. So not stuff that people were not guessing about, but sometimes you ask someone a question, say, oh, we're using such and such over there, and it's that version. But now this is really accurate data, you know, that was real time coming from the platform.
Thank you.
Any other questions? No. Okay.